My millionaire grandson visited me and said, "Is the $8,000 a month helping you, Grandma?" I replied, "I have to choose between my medicine and eating, sweetheart." He immediately went pale. A day later, we found out my DIL. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I stared at the pill bottle in my trembling hands, counting the remaining tablets for the third time today. 7 left. 7 pills between me and the crushing chest pain that had been my constant companion for months. The prescription label mocked me with its cheerful blueprint. Refill by March 15th. Today was March 20th. At 67, I never imagined I'd be sitting in my cramped studio apartment, making impossible choices between my heart medication and groceries. The Social Security check barely covered rent, leaving me with scraps for everything else. Pride had kept me from reaching out to family, but pride doesn't fill an empty stomach or stop a racing heart. I set the pills on my rickety kitchen table next to an envelope marked "Final Notice" in angry red letters. The electric company didn't care about my fixed income or my dignity. They wanted their money, and I didn't have it. The knock on my door startled me so badly I nearly knocked over my lukewarm tea. Through the peephole I saw a familiar silhouette that made my heart skip for entirely different reasons. Jasper, my grandson, 28 years old, successful, and someone I hadn't seen in person for almost 6 months. Grandma Harriet. His voice carried that warm enthusiasm that had melted my heart since he was 5 years old, gap-toothed and covered in playground dirt. Now, he stood in my doorway wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly income, his dark hair perfectly styled, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who'd never had to choose between medicine and meals. "Jasper, sweetheart." I smoothed my worn cardigan and tried to smile despite the exhaustion weighing on my shoulders. What a wonderful surprise. He enveloped me in a hug that smelled like expensive cologne and success. For a moment, I let myself pretend everything was fine, that I wasn't barely surviving, that my grandson couldn't feel how much weight I'd lost through my loose clothing. I was in the neighborhood for a client meeting and thought I'd stop by. He stepped back, his blue eyes scanning my face with concern. "You look tired, Grandma." I waved dismissively, leading him to my small living area. "Just getting older, dear. Can I make you some tea? I think I have some cookies somewhere." But as I moved toward the kitchen, Jasper caught sight of the pill bottles lined up on the counter like plastic soldiers. His expression shifted, and I watched his successful businessman facade crack slightly. "Grandma, are you taking care of yourself? Those are a lot of medications." Heat crept up my neck. "The doctor says they're necessary. Getting old isn't for the weak, as they say." Jasper settled onto my threadbare couch, looking around the apartment with new eyes. I followed his gaze, seeing my home through his perspective. The faded furniture I'd owned for decades, the empty refrigerator humming loudly in the corner, the stack of unpaid bills I'd tried to hide behind a decorative bowl. "The $8,000 I've been sending each month," he said suddenly, his voice careful and measured. "It's helping with all this, right? The medications, the bills, everything you need?" The words hit me like ice water. I gripped the back of my chair, my knees suddenly unsteady. "What $8,000? Jasper's face went white. Not pale, not concerned, white as fresh snow. "The money I send to Avalon every month, for your care. She said you needed help with medical expenses, groceries, utilities." His voice got smaller with each word. "She's been managing it for almost 2 years now." The room started spinning. 2 years. For 2 years, I'd been rationing pills, eating crackers for dinner, wearing sweaters indoors because I couldn't afford heating. For 2 years, I'd felt forgotten, abandoned, like a burden no one wanted to acknowledge. "Jasper," my voice came out as a whisper. "I haven't seen a penny of that money." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my grandson's face cycle through confusion, realization, and finally, a rage I'd never seen before. His hands clenched into fists on his knees. "She told me you were too proud to take money directly from me," he said, his voice hollow. "She said you'd feel better if it came through her, like family helping family. She said you were doing well, that the money was making sure you were comfortable." I sank into my chair, the full weight of the betrayal settling over me like a suffocating blanket. Avalon, my daughter-in-law, The woman who called me twice a month with cheerful updates about her life, who visited occasionally with store-bought cookies and sympathetic smiles about how difficult it must be to live on a fixed income. She visits sometimes, I heard myself saying, as if from a great distance. Brings me little things, asks how I'm managing. She always seems so concerned, so caring. Jasper stood abruptly, pacing to my small window that overlooked the parking lot. His reflection showed a man grappling with a truth too ugly to accept. Grandma, I've been sending her $8,000 every single month. $64,000 over the past 8 months alone. She said it was barely enough to cover your needs, that your health was declining, that she was doing everything she could, but he turned to face me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. My God, what has she done? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications too terrible to voice. I thought about all the times Avalon had mentioned Jasper was so busy with work that he couldn't visit. All the times she'd sighed about how expensive everything has gotten when I'd mentioned struggling with bills. All the times she'd patted my hand and said she understood how hard it must be to feel forgotten by family. She hadn't just stolen money, she'd stolen my grandson's love, my family connection, my dignity. She'd let me believe I was unwanted while positioning herself as my savior to Jasper. I have to choose between my heart medication and eating, I said quietly, the words scraping my throat raw. I haven't had a proper meal in days. I've been wearing my winter coat inside because I can't afford to heat this place properly. Jasper's composure finally cracked. He pressed his palms against his eyes, his shoulders shaking. I thought I was taking care of you. I thought Avalon was making sure you had everything you needed. She sent me pictures of groceries she'd supposedly bought for you, receipts for medications she'd supposedly picked up. The cruelty of it stole my breath. Not only had Avalon robbed me, she'd created an elaborate fiction to cover her tracks. She'd probably bought those groceries for her own family, filled her own prescriptions, and photographed them as evidence of her charitable care. She's been playing us both, I whispered, the realization settling like lead in my stomach. Jasper wiped his eyes and straightened his shoulders, his grief transforming into something harder, more determined. Grandma, this ends now, today. I'm going to make sure you get every penny you should have received, and I'm going to make sure Avalon faces consequences for what she's done. But even as relief flooded through me at the promise of help, a colder fear took root. If Avalon had been this calculating, this manipulative for 2 years without either of us suspecting, what else had she been lying about? What other damage had she done that we hadn't discovered yet? As Jasper pulled out his phone to start making calls, I caught my reflection in the dark window. I looked like exactly what I was, a forgotten old woman, cast aside and left to struggle alone. But something in my eyes had changed. The resignation was gone, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years. Determination. Avalon had underestimated me. She'd seen an elderly woman and assumed I was helpless, voiceless, easily discarded. She was about to learn just how wrong she'd been. The next morning, Jasper arrived at my apartment with a briefcase, dark circles under his eyes, and the grim expression of someone who'd spent the night uncovering ugly truths. He'd called ahead, his voice tight with controlled fury, asking me to gather any paperwork I had, bank statements, bills, anything that might help us understand the scope of Avalon's deception. I'd spread everything across my kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. Overdue notices, medical bills marked payment required, bank statements showing a balance that never seemed to climb above double digits. My entire financial life laid bare, a testament to 2 years of quiet desperation. I've been on the phone with my bank since 6 this morning, Jasper said, settling into the chair across from me. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of printed statements. Every transfer, every receipt Avalon provided, every lie she told. It's all here. His hands shook slightly as he spread the papers between us. I could see the rage simmering beneath his professional composure, the way his jaw tightened each time he mentioned her name. Look at this. He pointed to a bank transfer dated 8 months ago. $8,000 sent to an account Avalon claimed was set up specifically for your care. She called it the Harriet Care Fund. She even sent me paperwork that looked official, complete with account numbers and routing information. I leaned forward, studying the numbers that represented money I'd never seen. Help I'd desperately needed, but never received. Where did it actually go? Jasper's expression darkened. To her personal checking account. Every single penny. He flipped through more pages, his voice growing colder with each revelation. She'd wait a few days after each transfer, then move the money to different accounts. Some went to credit card payments for luxury purchases, some to a savings account she'd opened without my brother's knowledge. My brother, the casual way he said it reminded me that this betrayal cut even deeper than I'd realized. Avalon hadn't just stolen from me. She'd been stealing from her own husband's family, lying to her own stepson, manipulating the people who should have been able to trust her most. There's more, Jasper continued, pulling out his phone. These are text messages she sent me over the past year. He scrolled through screenshots, his face grim. Listen to this one from last Christmas. Harriet is doing much better thanks to your generosity. She was able to get her medications refilled and even bought herself a nice winter coat. She's so grateful but too proud to tell you herself. The words hit me like physical blows. Last Christmas, I'd spent the day alone, wearing my threadbare robe because my only winter coat had fallen apart. I'd eaten canned soup heated on my stove because I couldn't afford a proper holiday meal. Or this one from February, Jasper's voice was barely controlled. Had to take Harriet to the doctor today. Her heart condition is concerning, but thankfully we can afford the specialist now. She keeps saying she doesn't know what she'd do without family who cares. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the irregular flutter that had worsened over the winter months when I'd been skipping doses of my medication. I haven't seen a specialist in over a year, I whispered. I've been getting my prescriptions from the emergency clinic because I can't afford a cardiologist. Jasper set down his phone and reached across the table to take my hand. His was warm and steady. Mine was cold and trembling. Grandma, she created an entire fictional narrative. She made me believe you were not only okay, but actually thriving because of the money I was sending. I thought about Avalon's visits over the past 2 years, replaying them with this new, devastating context. The way she'd arrive with small gifts, a box of tea, a magazine, a potted plant, and present them as grand gestures of care. How she'd ask about my health with such apparent concern, making notes on her phone as if tracking my condition for medical purposes. She documented everything, I said slowly, the pieces falling into place. When she'd visit, she'd take pictures of my apartment, of me, of the little gifts she brought. I thought she was just being sentimental. She was building evidence, Jasper said grimly. Evidence of her supposed care. Look, he showed me photos on his phone that I recognized. Images of my living room, of me sitting in my chair wearing one of the cardigans she'd brought me, of my medicine cabinet with pills she'd supposedly helped me organize. But now I saw them differently. They weren't loving family photos. They were props in an elaborate performance, proof of a devoted daughter-in-law caring for her husband's grandmother. She'd probably sent these to Jasper as evidence of how she was spending his money. She told me you were too proud to accept money directly, Jasper continued. She said it would hurt your dignity to feel like charity, but that if it came through her, it felt more like family taking care of family. She made herself the hero of your story, Grandma. She made me believe she was sacrificing her time and energy to make sure you were comfortable. The manipulation was breathtaking in its completeness. Avalon hadn't just stolen money. She'd stolen my relationship with my grandson, my sense of being cared for, my hope that family mattered. She'd let me believe I was forgotten while convincing Jasper that she was my devoted caregiver. When I called her last night to confront her, Jasper said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Do you know what she said? She asked if you'd been making up stories again. She suggested that your memory might be failing, that you were confused about the money situation. A chill ran down my spine. Even caught red-handed, Avalon was still manipulating, still trying to make me the problem. She was suggesting I was losing my mind rather than admitting her theft. She's been planning for this possibility, I realized with growing horror. All those times she'd mention my forgetfulness during visits, the way she'd correct me if I misremembered something small. She was laying groundwork to discredit me if I ever questioned her. Jasper nodded grimly. She's been more calculated than either of us realized, but she made one mistake. She underestimated how much I love you. When I saw the truth of your living situation yesterday, When I realized what she'd done, he squeezed my hand tighter. There's no story she could tell that would make me doubt you. I felt tears threatening, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of relief, of validation, of finally being believed after months of gaslighting I hadn't even recognized as such. What happens now? I asked. Jasper's expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. A cold determination that reminded me he was more than just my loving grandson. He was a successful businessman who'd built his career on reading people and handling complex problems. Now we gather evidence, he said, all of it. Every lie, every manipulation, every dollar she stole, and then we make sure she faces consequences for what she's done to you. But even as hope bloomed in my chest for the first time in months, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only scratched the surface of Avalon's deception. If she'd been this calculating about the money, what else had she been lying about? What other damage had she done that we hadn't discovered yet? As if reading my thoughts, Jasper's phone buzzed with a text message. His face went pale as he read it, then showed me the screen. It was from Avalon. Harriet called me very confused this morning, asking about money that doesn't exist. I'm worried her condition is deteriorating faster than we thought. Maybe it's time to consider assisted living options. The audacity took my breath away. Even now, even after being caught, she was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to paint me as the problem that needed to be managed. But this time, I wasn't alone. This time, I had someone who believed me, someone who could see through her lies. This time, Avalon had finally pushed too far. She has no idea what's coming, Jasper said quietly, his voice carrying a promise that sent a thrill of anticipation through me. No, she didn't, and I was going to enjoy watching her world crumble just as thoroughly as she'd tried to destroy mine. Avalon arrived at my apartment exactly when she said she would, 2 p.m. sharp, carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers and wearing the concerned expression she'd perfected over 2 years of deception. I watched through my peephole as she checked her reflection in her phone screen, adjusting her carefully styled blonde hair before knocking with the same gentle rhythm she always used. Jasper was hidden in my bedroom, armed with a recording app on his phone and explicit instructions to stay quiet no matter what he heard. We'd decided this confrontation needed to happen naturally, without Avalon feeling ambushed. She had to reveal herself willingly, and she had to do it while we could document every word. "Harriet, sweetie." Her voice carried that same syrupy warmth it always did as I opened the door. She pressed the flowers into my hands and leaned in for her customary air kiss near my cheek. "How are you feeling today? You sounded so confused on the phone yesterday." There it was immediately. The gaslighting, the suggestion that I was the problem. She stepped into my apartment without waiting for an invitation, settling into my worn armchair as if she owned it. "I brought you some chamomile tea," she continued, pulling a box from her oversized purse. "I know how you get when you're anxious. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we're stressed about money, don't they?" I forced myself to remain calm, to play the role of the confused elderly woman she wanted me to be. "I suppose they do, though I could have sworn Jasper mentioned something about money he's been sending." Avalon's smile flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself. "Oh, honey, Jasper is such a sweet boy. Always worried about family. But you know how busy he is with work. I think sometimes he feels guilty that he can't visit more often, so he imagines he's doing more to help than he actually is." The casualness with which she rewrote reality was breathtaking. She was sitting in my living room, surrounded by evidence of my poverty, calmly explaining away my grandson's attempts to help as figments of his imagination. He seemed quite certain about sending money monthly. I pressed gently. "Through you," he said. This time the mask slipped more noticeably. Avalon's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against her purse clasp, and her voice took on a slightly sharper edge. "Harriet, sweetheart, I think you might be mixing up conversations. You know how memory can be at our age." She was only 42, but she said "our age" as if we were peers. Sometimes we want something to be true so badly that we convince ourselves it is. I sat down across from her, studying the woman who'd been systematically destroying my life while wearing a mask of care. Everything about her was carefully constructed. The concerned expression, the gentle tone, even the way she sat with her hands folded in her lap like a dutiful daughter-in-law. "Maybe you could call Jasper and ask him directly," I suggested, just to clear things up. For the first time, genuine alarm flashed in Avalon's eyes. Oh, I don't think we need to bother him at work. You know how important his job is. Besides, I just spoke to him yesterday, and he's very concerned about your confusion. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages with practiced ease. Look, see? He texted me this morning asking how you were doing. He's worried about your mental state, Harriet. We all are. She turned the phone toward me, showing a text conversation, but I could see it was one-sided. All messages from Avalon to Jasper, with no responses visible. She was creating evidence in real time, documenting her supposed concern for his review. I told him I'd check on you today, she continued, typing rapidly. I'm going to let him know that you seem more confused than usual. It might be time to consider some additional care options. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. If I continued questioning her story, she'd escalate her claims about my mental deterioration. She'd push for assisted living, for someone else to make decisions about my life, conveniently removing me from any position to challenge her lies. You're very thoughtful to be so concerned, I said carefully. It must be difficult, managing everything for an old woman like me. Avalon's expression softened, apparently believing she'd successfully redirected the conversation. It is challenging sometimes, but that's what family does. We take care of each other, though I have to admit, the financial burden has been significant. My heart stopped. She was actually going to continue the lie even now, even when she thought I was too confused to challenge her effectively. Financial burden? I prompted. Well, yes. Your medical expenses, the groceries, the utilities we help with. It's not easy for a young family to support an elderly relative, especially with your increasing needs, she sighed dramatically. We stretch ourselves thin to make sure you're comfortable. I stared at her, watching this woman who'd stolen thousands of dollars from me claim she was making financial sacrifices for my care. The audacity was so complete, it was almost admirable. How much would you say you spend on me monthly? I asked, genuinely curious to see how far she'd take the lie. Avalon hesitated, probably calculating what amount would seem generous but not suspicious. Oh, it varies. Some months it's $6,000 or $7,000, especially when you have medical emergencies. We just want to make sure you never have to worry about money. $6,000 or $7,000. She was claiming to spend nearly the full amount Jasper sent, just leaving herself a small margin for handling fees. She'd calculated exactly how to maximize her theft while maintaining plausible deniability. That's very generous, I said, though I don't remember any recent medical emergencies. Avalon's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, that's part of the concern, Harriet. You've been forgetting quite a lot lately. Last month, when I took you to the cardiologist, you seemed very disoriented afterward. I hadn't seen a cardiologist in over a year. She was now fabricating entire medical appointments, creating a history of care that existed only in her lies. I wish I could remember that visit, I said. Could you remind me what the doctor said? For the first time, Avalon looked genuinely uncomfortable. She shifted in her chair, her manicured fingers worrying the edge of her purse. The details aren't important, sweetheart. What matters is that we're monitoring your condition closely. The doctor was pleased that we're able to afford the proper care for you. She was improvising now, speaking in generalities because she couldn't provide specifics about a medical appointment that had never happened, but she was still maintaining the central lie. That money was being spent on my care, that she was the hero managing my health. I'm so grateful, I said, my voice deliberately frail. I don't know what I'd do without you looking after me. Avalon's expression brightened, apparently convinced she'd successfully reinforced her narrative. That's exactly what I told Jasper. You're so dependent on the care we provide. It would be devastating if anything disrupted that support system. Another threat, wrapped in concern. She was reminding me that challenging her meant losing the very help she claimed to be providing. Of course, I now knew there was no help to lose, but she believed her manipulation was still working. Though I do worry, she continued, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone, about what would happen if Jasper's business situation changed. Young men in demanding careers, you never know how long the success will last. My blood ran cold. She was already planning contingencies, preparing explanations for why the money might stop coming. She was thinking steps ahead, calculating how to maintain her story even if circumstances changed. "Jasper's business is unstable?" I asked. "Oh, not unstable exactly, but competitive, high stress. These young entrepreneurs, they burn out so quickly. I just want to make sure we have backup plans for your care if his financial situation changes." She was planting seeds of doubt about Jasper's reliability, setting up a narrative where she was the stable caregiver and he was the unpredictable variable. If questioned later about missing money, she could claim his business problems affected his ability to help. The sophistication of her manipulation was staggering. She wasn't just stealing money, she was constructing an entire alternate reality where she was indispensable and everyone else was unreliable. "You think of everything," I said, meaning it in a way she'd never understand. Avalon stood up, apparently satisfied that she'd reinforced her control. "I should go check on dinner preparations, but I'll text Jasper about our conversation today. He'll want to know how you're doing." She was going to report back to him about my supposed confusion, adding another layer to her documentation of my declining mental state. Every interaction was evidence in her carefully constructed case for my incompetence. "Thank you for the flowers," I said as she gathered her things, "and for everything else you do." "Of course, sweetie. That's what family does." She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. "Try not to worry about money matters, okay? Sometimes thinking too hard about finances can make the confusion worse. Just focus on staying comfortable and let us handle the complicated stuff." After she left, I sat in my chair for several minutes, processing what I'd just witnessed. Avalon hadn't just maintained her lies, she'd doubled down on them, adding new fabrications and threats with every exchange. Jasper emerged from the bedroom, his face pale with rage. "Did you hear all of that?" "Every word," he said, holding up his phone. "Medical appointments that never happened, financial support that doesn't exist, threats about your mental state if you don't comply." His voice was shaking with fury. "She's not just a thief, Grandma. She's a predator." I nodded, feeling strangely calm despite everything I'd just endured. She's been at this for so long, it's become natural to her. She actually believes her own lies at this point. "Not for much longer," Jasper said grimly. "Because now we have everything we need to destroy her." As I watched him scroll through the recording, documenting each lie for future reference, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of being proven right. Avalon had revealed herself completely, and she had no idea the trap she'd just walked into. The confrontation was over, but the real reckoning was just beginning. 3 days after recording Avalon's lies, Jasper returned to my apartment with a manila folder thick enough to choke on, and an expression that told me our investigation had uncovered something far worse than simple theft. He set the folder on my kitchen table with the reverence of someone handling evidence at a murder trial. "Grandma, I need you to sit down for this," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "What we found goes beyond the money, much deeper than either of us imagined." I settled into my chair, bracing myself. Over the past 72 hours, I'd assumed we'd documented everything. The stolen funds, the fabricated medical visits, the manipulation. But Jasper's expression suggested we'd barely scratched the surface. "I hired a private investigator," he began, opening the folder. "Someone who specializes in financial fraud. We traced every transaction, every communication, every lie Avalon has told over the past 2 years." He pulled out a stack of printed emails, bank statements, and phone records. "It started with this." He handed me a printout of an email dated 3 years ago, 6 months before the financial theft began. The sender was Avalon. The recipient was someone named Marcus Chen, listed as a family care coordinator. My hands trembled as I read her words. "Marcus, we discussed the elderly care situation. H is becoming more isolated and probably won't notice discrepancies in financial management. She's already expressing confusion about bills and medications. J is very busy with work and trusts me completely to handle family matters. I think we can proceed with the plan we discussed. Let me know what documentation you need." "Who is Marcus Chen?" I whispered. "A man who doesn't exist," Jasper said grimly. The email account was created by Avalon using a fake name. She was sending emails to herself, creating a paper trail that made it look like she was consulting with a professional about your care. I stared at the email, my mind reeling. 3 years ago, I'd been healthier, more independent. Avalon had been planning this deception long before I actually needed help, positioning herself to take advantage of a crisis that hadn't even occurred yet. There's more. Jasper pulled out another document. She created an entire fake business, Chen Family Services, legitimate-looking website, professional letterhead, even fake reviews, all designed to make it appear she was working with qualified professionals to manage your care. He showed me printed screenshots of a website that looked completely professional, testimonials from grateful families, descriptions of comprehensive elderly care services, even photos of smiling seniors receiving help. All of it fabricated to support Avalon's lies. When I started sending money, she'd forward me reports from this fake company, Jasper continued. Detailed accounts of your medical appointments, grocery deliveries, household maintenance. She even included photos, pictures she'd taken during her actual visits to you, but presented as documentation of services she was supposedly paying for. I remembered those photos now with sick clarity. Avalon always had her phone out during visits, taking pictures of me in my chair, of my medicine cabinet, of my sparse refrigerator. I'd thought she was being sentimental, documenting our time together. Instead, she was creating props for an elaborate fraud. The grocery deliveries she documented, I said slowly, I never received them. Because she was buying groceries for her own family and photographing the receipts, Jasper confirmed. Same with the medications, the cleaning services, the medical equipment. Everything she claimed to purchase for you actually went to her own household. The sophistication of the deception was breathtaking. Avalon hadn't just stolen money. She'd created an entire fictional business infrastructure to justify the theft. She'd spent months building believable documentation before ever asking for financial help. But that's not the worst part, Jasper said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. He pulled out a different set of papers. Phone records, text message logs, email communications. She was actively sabotaging your other relationships, making sure you stayed isolated and dependent on her. My blood turned to ice. What do you mean? Your neighbor, Mrs. Peterson. She tried to invite you to her granddaughter's birthday party last year. Do you remember getting that invitation? I frowned, searching my memory. No, I never heard about any party. Because Avalon intercepted the invitation. He showed me a printed email exchange between Avalon and Mrs. Peterson. She told your neighbor that you were having difficulties and that social gatherings were too overwhelming for your condition. She suggested Mrs. Peterson avoid future invitations to prevent upsetting you. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Mrs. Peterson had been my closest neighbor for 15 years. When she'd suddenly stopped including me in social activities, I'd assumed she was losing interest in our friendship. Instead, Avalon had systematically destroyed the relationship by portraying me as mentally fragile. Your cousin Janet in Portland tried to send you a care package last Christmas, Jasper continued relentlessly. Avalon contacted the shipping company and had it returned, claiming you'd moved and left no forwarding address. She then told Janet that you'd specifically asked not to receive any packages because they confused you. I felt the walls of my world crumbling around me. Janet had been my closest remaining family connection besides Jasper. When the Christmas cards stopped coming, when the occasional phone calls ended, I'd assumed she'd simply gotten busy with her own life. Instead, Avalon had systematically severed that relationship too. How many people? I asked, my voice barely audible. Jasper's expression was grim as he flipped through more documents. Everyone, Grandma. Every friend. Every family member. Every connection you had outside of her control. She created a systematic campaign to isolate you, making it appear that you were declining mentally and socially. He showed me a detailed log he'd compiled. Dozens of intercepted communications, blocked invitations, redirected packages, and fabricated health updates. Avalon had appointed herself as my unofficial guardian, filtering all my interactions with the outside world. She told people you were developing dementia, Jasper continued, that you were becoming paranoid and hostile toward visitors. She painted herself as the devoted daughter-in-law, sacrificing her time and energy to care for an increasingly difficult elderly woman. The cruelty of it was staggering. Not only had Avalon stolen my money, she'd stolen my connections, my social life, my independence. She'd created a prison of isolation and convinced everyone that it was for my own good. "Your doctor's office has a note in your file," Jasper said, his voice tight with anger. "Avalon called them 6 months ago, claiming to be your designated caregiver. She told them you were experiencing memory issues and that all medical communications should go through her to avoid confusing you. That's why they stopped calling me directly about appointments," I realized with horror. "I thought they were just being more efficient by working through family. She was intercepting your medical communications too. The appointment reminders, test results, medication updates. Everything was being filtered through her. She had complete control over your healthcare information. I thought about all the times I'd felt confused about my medical care, uncertain about prescription changes or appointment schedules. I'd attributed it to getting older, to normal forgetfulness. Instead, it was systematic information deprivation designed to make me more dependent on Avalon's supposed help. "There's one more thing," Jasper said, pulling out a final document that made my heart stop. "She contacted Adult Protective Services last month." "What?" "She filed a report expressing concern about your living conditions and mental state. She claimed you were refusing help, becoming hostile toward family members, and showing signs of serious cognitive decline. She requested a welfare check." The room started spinning. I never had any visit from Protective Services, because the caseworker called her first, as the listed family contact. Avalon told them the situation had stabilized and that you were now accepting appropriate care. She provided documentation of the supposed medical support and financial assistance you were receiving. I stared at the report, reading Avalon's description of my life. Subject appears malnourished and confused, living in unsanitary conditions, refuses assistance from family members and becomes agitated when care is offered, requires immediate intervention before situation deteriorates further. She documented my genuine struggles, the result of her theft, and presented them as evidence of my mental decline. Then she'd positioned herself as the solution, the caring family member trying to provide appropriate help. "If you had ever challenged her publicly," Jasper said quietly, "she had an official report documenting your supposed mental instability. Anyone who questioned her story would be directed to this Protective Services file." The trap had been complete. Avalon had stolen my money, isolated me from family and friends, controlled my medical information, and created official documentation of my supposed incompetence. If I'd ever tried to expose her, she could have had me declared mentally unfit and possibly even institutionalized. "She was planning to have me committed," I whispered, the full scope of her scheme finally clear. "I think that was always the end game," Jasper confirmed. "Complete control over your finances and your life. She could have continued receiving money indefinitely while you were safely locked away somewhere." Unable to contradict her stories, I sat in silence for several minutes, absorbing the magnitude of what had been done to me. This wasn't simple theft or even elaborate fraud. This was a systematic destruction of my entire existence, carefully planned and methodically executed over years. But as the shock began to wear off, something else emerged. Something cold and hard and absolutely unforgiving. "She made one mistake," I said finally, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. "What's that?" I looked up at my grandson, seeing my own determination reflected in his eyes. "She underestimated both of us. She thought I was helpless and you were naive. She was wrong on both counts." Jasper nodded grimly. "She has no idea what's coming." "No, she didn't. But she was about to learn that some people, when pushed too far, don't just push back. They obliterate everything in their path, and Avalon had definitely pushed too far. Planning Avalon's downfall required the same meticulous attention to detail she'd used to destroy my life. Over the next 2 weeks, Jasper and I became co-conspirators in the most satisfying project I'd undertaken in years. We met daily in my small apartment, spreading documents across my kitchen table like generals plotting a military campaign. "We need her to hang herself with her own lies," Jasper explained as we reviewed our strategy. "No dramatic confrontations, no emotional scenes, just quiet, systematic exposure that leaves her no room to manipulate her way out. The beauty of our plan was its simplicity. We would give Avalon exactly what she'd been asking for, complete control over my care narrative, and let her elaborate on her fiction until it became impossible to maintain. Phase 1, I said, checking items off the list we'd compiled. I become the confused elderly woman she's been telling everyone I am. It was easier than I'd expected to play the role. During Avalon's next visit, I greeted her with exaggerated confusion about our previous conversation. I asked repeatedly about money I thought I remembered, then seemed to forget the questions minutes later. I mentioned imaginary conversations with neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in months. Avalon ate it up. I watched her face light up with vindicated satisfaction as she pulled out her phone to document my deteriorating condition with photos and voice memos. "Harriet seems much more confused today," she murmured into her phone after I'd asked her the same question 3 times. "She's asking about money that doesn't exist and claiming to remember conversations that never happened. I'm concerned her dementia is progressing faster than expected." She sent these updates to Jasper immediately, along with suggestions that we might need to explore care options sooner than anticipated. Each message was evidence of her eagerness to have me declared incompetent. "Phase 2, Jasper announced during one of our planning sessions. "We give her opportunities to expand her lies until they become impossible to track." He began asking Avalon for more detailed reports about my care. What specific medications was she helping me manage? Which doctors had we seen recently? What medical equipment had been purchased for my comfort? Avalon, confident in her established narrative, provided elaborate details. She described prescription changes that had never happened, specialist consultations that were pure fiction, and medical equipment purchases that existed only in her imagination. "The cardiologist wants to increase her beta blocker dosage," she texted Jasper after one of my performances. "And the physical therapist recommended a new walker with better stability features. I've also arranged for weekly blood pressure monitoring at home." None of it was true, but Avalon documented each fabrication with the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned before. She was building an elaborate medical history that would be impossible to verify because none of it had actually occurred. Meanwhile, I was reconnecting with the world she'd tried to sever me from. Mrs. Peterson was delighted to hear from me when I called to ask about her granddaughter's birthday party. Janet in Portland was confused, but thrilled when I reached out to ask why she'd stopped sending Christmas cards. "I tried to send you a package last year," Janet told me during a long phone conversation, "but it was returned with a note saying you'd moved. Your daughter-in-law called to tell me you were having memory problems and that packages confused you." "Avalon said that? She seemed so concerned about you. She asked me not to contact you directly anymore because it agitated you." I felt terrible that I was causing problems. Each conversation revealed another layer of Avalon's systematic isolation campaign. But now, instead of feeling devastated by the betrayal, I felt energized by the evidence we were collecting. Every severed relationship was proof of her manipulation. Every intercepted communication was documentation of her control. "Phase 3, Jasper said as we entered our 3rd week of planning. "We let her believe she's winning." This was the most challenging part for me emotionally. I had to watch Avalon discuss my care options with apparent sadness while secretly celebrating her perceived victory. She brought brochures for assisted living facilities, spoke in hushed tones about my declining condition, and positioned herself as the reluctant family member forced to make difficult decisions. "It's so hard to watch someone you care about deteriorate," she told Jasper during a phone call I listened to on speaker. "But I think we need to face reality. Harriet can't live independently much longer. She's becoming a danger to herself." She scheduled tours of memory care facilities, claiming she was researching options just in case. She even contacted a lawyer about obtaining guardianship rights, presenting herself as the only family member willing to take responsibility for my welfare. Each action was documented. Each lie was recorded. Each manipulation was preserved for future reference. Avalon was building the case for her own destruction with the same thoroughness she'd used to isolate me. But the most satisfying part of our plan was watching her grow careless with success. Confident that her narrative was unquestioned, she began taking greater risks. She started spending more of Jasper's money on obvious luxuries, a new car, expensive jewelry, home renovations that she claimed were accessibility improvements for my visits. "I had to upgrade the guest bathroom for when Harriet stays with us," she texted Jasper with photos of a complete remodel that cost nearly $15,000. The old setup wasn't safe for someone with her mobility issues. I'd never stayed at their house. I'd never even been invited for dinner. But Avalon was so confident in her established lies that she felt comfortable using my supposed needs to justify major home improvements. She also began manipulating other family members more aggressively. She contacted distant cousins and old family friends, updating them on my condition and subtly soliciting sympathy for the burden of caring for me. Harriet's situation has become quite challenging, she wrote in a group email to extended family. We're doing everything we can to keep her comfortable, but the financial and emotional strain is significant. Any thoughts or prayers would be appreciated. Several family members responded with offers to help, which Avalon graciously accepted on my behalf. She set up a small network of people sending occasional financial contributions for my care, money that went directly into her personal accounts. The scope of her operation had expanded far beyond simple theft. She was running a comprehensive fraud scheme that exploited my supposed vulnerability to manipulate sympathy and money from anyone who'd ever cared about me. She's gotten greedy, Jasper observed as we reviewed the latest evidence. The more successful she's been, the more risks she's taking. By the end of the third week, we had everything we needed: bank records showing thousands of dollars in unauthorized transactions, phone logs documenting systematic isolation of my social connections, medical communications proving she'd interfered with my health care, email trails revealing fabricated businesses and fake professional consultations. Most damning of all, we had recordings of her enthusiastically planning my involuntary commitment to memory care while simultaneously stealing the money that was supposed to be supporting my independence. Phase 4, I said, reviewing our final checklist with grim satisfaction. We spring the trap. The meeting was scheduled for the following Friday at Jasper's office. Avalon believed she was coming to discuss the final arrangements for my transition to assisted living. She'd spent the week preparing documentation of my deteriorating condition and researching facilities that could accommodate my complex needs. She had no idea she was walking into her own execution. The night before the meeting, I sat in my apartment surrounded by evidence of everything Avalon had stolen from me. Not just money, but relationships, independence, dignity, and nearly my sanity. For 2 years, she'd systematically dismantled my life while positioning herself as my savior. Tomorrow, she would learn that some people, when pushed beyond their breaking point, don't just survive, they thrive, and they remember everything that was done to them. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window, seeing not the confused elderly woman Avalon had tried to create, but the sharp, determined person I'd always been underneath the facade. She'd tried to make me disappear, to reduce me to a problem that needed managing. Instead, she'd awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long: the absolute refusal to be dismissed, discarded, or destroyed by anyone. Avalon had no idea what was coming, but tomorrow she would learn exactly who she'd been playing games with. And the game was about to end. Avalon arrived at Jasper's office 15 minutes early, carrying a leather portfolio filled with her carefully fabricated evidence, and wearing the expression of someone who believed she was about to claim her final victory. I watched from the reception area as she smoothed her hair and checked her makeup in the elevator reflection, preparing for what she thought would be a routine discussion about my placement in memory care. She had no idea I was there. Jasper had arranged for us to use his company's main conference room, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows and recording equipment built into the table. Everything that happened in the next hour would be documented with crystal clarity. "Mrs. Avalon, thank you for coming," Jasper said formally as he led her into the conference room. "I've asked my grandmother to join us today. I thought it was important for her to be part of this conversation." The color drained from Avalon's face as I walked in behind them. For just a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped, revealing genuine panic before she reasserted her concerned daughter-in-law expression. "Harriet, sweetie, I didn't expect to see you here," she said, her voice slightly strained. "Are you feeling up to such a long meeting? I know how these discussions can be overwhelming for you." I settled into the chair across from her, meeting her eyes with a clarity that made her shift uncomfortably. "I'm feeling quite sharp today, actually. The sharpest I've felt in months." Avalon glanced nervously between Jasper and me, clearly sensing that something had changed, but unable to identify the threat. "Well, that's wonderful. Though you know how these good days can be followed by more difficult ones." "Actually," Jasper said, opening his own portfolio, "I think we should start by reviewing some documentation, financial records specifically." He spread the bank statements across the table, every transfer, every stolen dollar, every fraudulent transaction clearly highlighted. Avalon's eyes darted across the papers, her breathing becoming shallow as the scope of the evidence became clear. "These show every payment I've sent over the past 2 years," Jasper continued matter-of-factly. $160,000 total, all sent to accounts you controlled, supposedly for my grandmother's care. Avalon's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the papers. "Yes, and as you can see, every penny was used for Harriet's needs. The medical expenses alone have been staggering." "Really?" I spoke for the first time since sitting down. "Which medical expenses were those, specifically?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Avalon looked at me with growing alarm, clearly recognizing that the confused elderly woman she'd been manipulating was nowhere to be found. "Your cardiologist visits, the specialist consultations, the medications," she stammered. "All the care we've discussed." Jasper pulled out another set of documents. "These are medical records from my grandmother's actual doctors. No specialist visits in the past year. No cardiologist consultations. No prescription changes. In fact, her primary care physician has a note that all communications were being filtered through you, which prevented them from providing adequate care." Avalon's facade was cracking visibly now. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool conference room temperature. "There must be some confusion. I have documentation of all the medical care we've provided." "You mean this documentation?" I reached into my own bag and pulled out printed emails between Avalon and the fictitious Marcus Chen. "The fake medical consultation business you created. The website that doesn't actually exist. The professional references that lead to disconnected phone numbers." The silence that followed was deafening. Avalon stared at the evidence of her own fabrications, her mouth opening and closing without sound. For 2 years, she'd been the one controlling information, managing narratives, deciding what truth looked like. Now she was faced with actual truth, and she had no response prepared. "Or perhaps you meant this documentation," Jasper added, placing the phone records on the table. "The systematic interception of my grandmother's communications with family and friends, the lies you told to isolate her from everyone who cared about her." Avalon finally found her voice, but it came out as a desperate whisper. Harriet was confused. "I was protecting her from situations that would have agitated her condition." "What condition?" I asked sharply. "The condition you invented? The dementia you fabricated to justify controlling my life." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. "For 2 years, you convinced my grandson that I was well cared for while I was choosing between heart medication and food. You stole money meant to help me survive while documenting my deterioration as proof of your dedicated care. You isolated me from every person who might have actually helped me, then used my resulting desperation as evidence that I was mentally incompetent." Avalon's breathing was becoming rapid and shallow. "I was trying to help. The money situation is complicated, and I was managing everything to make sure you had what you needed." "What I needed," I said, my voice rising for the first time, "was the money my grandson was sending. What I needed was contact with my family and friends. What I needed was control over my own medical care. You stole all of that while convincing everyone you were a saint." Jasper placed one final document on the table, the Adult Protective Services report Avalon had filed. "This is particularly interesting. You reported my grandmother as a vulnerable adult in need of intervention, then positioned yourself as the solution to the problem you'd created by stealing her support money." Avalon stared at the report, her last defense crumbling. "I was concerned about her welfare. You were concerned about maintaining control," I corrected. "You needed official documentation of my supposed incompetence in case anyone ever questioned your authority over my life." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Avalon's labored breathing. She looked around desperately, searching for an exit that didn't exist. Every lie had been exposed, every manipulation documented, every cruel calculation laid bare. "The Adult Protective Services caseworker will be very interested in this evidence," Jasper said quietly, "as will the police, the district attorney's office, and every family member you've been soliciting money from under false pretenses." Avalon's composure finally shattered completely. "You can't prove I intended to hurt anyone. I was trying to help manage a difficult situation. By stealing over $160,000? I asked. By fabricating medical emergencies and intercepting healthcare communications? By systematically destroying my relationships with people who cared about me? I stood up, looking down at the woman who'd tried to erase me from my own life. You didn't just steal money, Avalon. You stole 2 years of my life. You stole my dignity, my independence, my connections with people I love. You turned my own grandson against me by convincing him I was too proud to accept help, while ensuring I never received any. Tears were streaming down Avalon's face now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic, of someone finally facing consequences for actions they'd assumed would never be discovered. I can pay it back, she whispered desperately. The money. I can return all of it. We don't need to involve other people in this family matter. This stopped being a family matter the moment you decided to systematically destroy an elderly woman's life for profit, Jasper said coldly. This is now a criminal matter. I reached for my purse, pulling out a thick envelope. These are letters from every person you convinced to stop contacting me. Family members, friends, neighbors, all the people who cared about me but were told I was too mentally fragile to maintain relationships. I scattered the letters across the table, each one documenting another severed connection, another relationship Avalon had poisoned with her lies. They're all planning to visit me this weekend. They want to see for themselves how remarkably sharp and independent I am for someone who supposedly has advanced dementia. Avalon looked at the letters with growing horror. Her carefully constructed narrative was about to be exposed to everyone she'd manipulated. The sympathetic extended family who'd been sending money, the neighbors who'd been avoiding me to prevent agitation, the friends who'd been told I was too confused to maintain contact, they would all learn the truth. We're not asking for anything from you, I continued, my voice steady and final. We're telling you what's going to happen. You're going to face charges for elder abuse, financial fraud, and mail tampering. You're going to be exposed to every person you've lied to, and you're going to lose everything you stole from me, plus penalties. I leaned across the table, meeting her terrified eyes. But most importantly, you're going to learn now. I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.